Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Can you hear me, see me well?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me, see me okay?
Yeah. Love the background.
Thank
Very-
you. This is my actual room because my laptop's too old to do the green screen thing.
Really?
Mhm.
That's funny. So it's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I'm so excited to have you on the show. When um Andrew from White Bear PR talked about bringing you on, I was so excited because I have never gotten to interview anybody that's done a documentary yet. So
Oh, great.
it's
Well,
going to be
I'm
something new for the show.
well, I did a lot of them, so I that's great. Then just pull it. Oh, okay, I can see you better now. Okay.
Awesome. Ready to get started?
Yeah, of course. Let's do it.
Alrighty. So, welcome to CwC. I am so excited to have you on the show to talk about your personal journey of being a composer and also your work on Disney Plus and National Geographic's Secrets of Whales series. Would you
Mhm.
please introduce yourself to our audience who might not be familiar with your work?
Yeah, of course. I am a composer for film and TV based in New York, originally France. I've been living in the US for a while now. I've started music when I was just a little kid. I was maybe around 4 when I started playing the piano. And then I started to get really obsessed about film scores in my childhood, grabbing a recorder in the movie theaters to just record some
Mhm.
like just some bits of movies audio so I can just play it again in my room afterwards. So I was already obsessed with it, and I think it was more of a dream than something realistic, something you could make you can do for a living. Um, and then I had this like classical background, classical training for years, um, in a conservatory in France, and I ended up just switching uh, path at some point when I was around 17, and I did a lot of advertising, communication jobs, and I ended up in tech at Google. And I actually left my job at Google after a life-changing event. Um, in 2015, and that's where uh, I really started to be a full-time composer. And yeah, I don't know if you want to know more about the background, but I think that's pretty much it.
Absolutely. If that's something you're comfortable with talking about, it was one of the things that Andrew mentioned in his email. So if that's something you'd love to talk about on the show, let's dive into it.
Of course, you mean the switch when I left my career to be a full-time composer?
Yeah, I would love to hear more about that. Until I was 17, I was studying to be an aerospace engineer. I
No
actually,
way. That's also very cool. That explains the background.
yes. Um, when I was 17, I actually was the highest ranking student officer for the Idaho Science and Aerospace Scholars Summer Academy that actually went and did like experiments and stuff at NASA. And then at the end of that, I was like, this just isn't it for me. This
Amazing.
and so that's what brought me to decide, you know what, composing is what I want to be my path. So I'd love to hear more about how you went from Google to where you are now.
Yeah, well, I wish I was, as smart as you were, because because I was 17 and I pretty much been kicked out of school, music school, because they basically told me that if I didn't want to be a pianist, a professional pianist, I had nothing to do at the conservatory. So I felt really hurt, and it was really, I didn't want to stop music. I really had a feeling that I wanted to do something. I really wanted to do something with music. I just didn't know what. I really knew that I didn't want it to be, a performer. So being on a stage and performing for like thousands of people, that was really not what I wanted to do. But I think I just maybe I lacked guidance, back then, and so I just gave up on music, thinking that it was not for me. And I studied, communications and history in France, and then I ended up in communications, and I did a lot of PR and marketing, and I ended up at Google, that I really liked. I know it was amazing, surrounded by, incredibly interesting, talented people. So that was a great period of my life too. But I got invited one day in 2015 to a Google event, a private event for PR and policy people at the Abbey Road Studios in London, where I would live back then. And I remember going, being like, ugh, another event that's, not gonna like. But I love film scores. I love music in general. I'm just gonna go and see what's happening there. And I ended up in the mixing room of, Studio Two, being taken through, the process of recording for movies, by an engineer, who was a resident, at Abbey Road Studio, and he just showed me some mock-ups of Stephen Price's score for Fury back then. And I remember being in this room with all these people in PR and policy. They were just drinking their champagne and not really caring about what was going on. And I was on the couch crying. We're like, this is just the most magical place I've ever been invited to be in. I knew what a studio was, and I knew kind of like, all these wires and monitors and consoles were for. I just I just had a slight idea, about how they would all fit together, but it made so much sense to me. It was the only thing that would make sense in my life at this very point. It was like, this is where I belong. And 2 weeks after, I left my job at Google, and I decided to just try and be a composer myself. I was already kind of composing in my room, trying to learn, software's logic, and I was already trying to get into it. But I would not put anything out there. I would not show nor send my music to anyone, not even my close family or my friends. I just didn't thought it was for me, and that nav was not good enough. So it was tough, because I started from nothing. I really literally started from an industry where I would, know everybody in tech, like, great people, great friends. But from a day to another, they were like strangers to, what I was doing and what I was starting on my own. So that was a very lonely journey at the beginning. And I ended up just practicing for hours and hours in my little bedroom, trying to make sense of all the softwares and things that I had never learned before, using, my good old, foundation, like basics that I had when I was a kid at the conservatory, about theory and about music. Um, Thankfully, I never stopped playing the piano. So everywhere I would go in my life, from like age 4 to now, I had a piano with me. There was even a time when I was living in Paris where, I was looking for a place, and I was just, I would sleep over at, friend's apartment, because I didn't have nowhere to go, but I still had my 88 keys to piano with me. That was the only thing that I had with me, and my pajama, basically.
Mhm.
So I always had a piano with me. But when I stopped, my career in communications, it was really, really all about, okay, now you don't have any excuse, and you have to get on it, and you have to practice and actually have something you're going to put out there. So that's how it started. And that was very long. I'm sorry.
You're all good. The great thing about a podcast is people go into it looking for a long form format. So
Great.
somebody out there is painting their basement, and this is going to be a big part of their day.
That's amazing. I love that.
I want to kind of get into what you were just saying. The first thing is, how when you start learning music as a child, a lot of the times what you're told is you can be a performer. And
Mhm.
that's really all there is to being a musician. People make you think that's the only
Absolutely.
job that's available.
That is such a mistake. That is really a huge mistake, because I know
Mhm.
a lot of people that I've met at the conservatory when I was, younger, who were not, definitely they were not meant to be performers, but they were really good at music, and they just left because there was no other option. At least where I was, it's probably not the same for, everyone or everywhere you go and study music. But yeah, it's damaging. It's really a shame.
I was really lucky that when I was 14, my high school music theory teacher, she gave us this big presentation one day called The Careers That You Can Have in Music.
Oh,
And
amazing.
it was just an hour where she went over like 20 some different career options that
That's
musicians can have. And then when I got to college, there's so many people who are like, I came here to study vocal performance. And then they realize being a ethnomusicologist or being a producer or something else is actually where they shine. But nobody tells them to look
amazing.
at those areas. They just kind of have to figure it out for
Because
themselves.
it feels like it seems like the message that we get, especially when we're young and, and we don't know much about, the possibilities ahead. It feels like being a performer is the ultimate goal in anything when it comes to music, and that this is the ultimate place to shine. um and I completely disagree with that. And I had this deep feeling, like deep inside, that deep down, that I wanted to be by my piano all the time, but playing something else, or just playing around with melodies that wouldn't exist, or just try to mimic the composers that I was such a fan of. And it didn't feel right. It didn't feel legit. It didn't feel like it was something I was supposed to do. So I was doing it in secret, and I was basically going back from school, and then from high school, just going to my piano, making sure that nobody was in the house, and starting to do those things. But never in public, never with my parents around. And yeah, that's a shame. That's a shame. But at the same time, I didn't tell anybody. So I wish I had this, teacher that you met, who would have told me, that's totally fine. There are so many other things you could do, even like I don't know, improvisation or jazz or anything, that's not performing classical music.
I agree. I think it's something that everywhere we should be trying to integrate more into our education. Show kids that being a musician
It's
doesn't
so
mean
many things. Yeah.
you have to be concert master. That's not your only option.
Exactly. And these, and I have an epiphany one day, because I was having a chat with some very, very established, successful violinist. And he was telling me, when I just met him and listened what I was doing, and he said, like, I could never do that. I could never do that. And in my mind, it was the other way around. It was like, because he's such a good performer, of course he can compose music, and he can do something like that. That anybody with a background in music could do that. It's actually not exactly true. And it's great to be able to find our sweet spot when we, yeah, exactly, like as you said, when we shine and we're happy, where most importantly, where we're happy.
I totally agree. One of my friends, he's a concert pianist. For the past 3 years, he has been practicing a Rachmaninoff concerto for a
Oh,
concerto competition that's next year. And he's just been refining it for the past few years, his performance of it. And I look at that and I'm like, I couldn't practice one piece for that long, that deliberately. I could
that's yeah.
never.
They are like Olympic champions to me, these people. And you know we all have our expertise, we all have our speciality, and some composers are incredible performers, and that happens too. And it's also okay to just feel more comfortable in one area. And it's true, I mean, I could not, and I was pushed so many times to train and to practice one very piece for a year, and I was like, this just doesn't make any sense to me. I want to do more, I want to experience more. So yeah.
I totally agree. I had a teacher who, because I couldn't sing, and my training is in clarinet performance before I got to college, because I couldn't sing, he said that I probably couldn't be a composer.
Oh, what? What? What sort of connection is that?
Exactly. Some things
Oh,
just don't make sense. But I am so glad to have you here and writing this amazing music. And I hope other people look at your journey and are able to relate it to their own and see, I can take this track to being a musician, or people that have taken a break from music as a career or educational path. They'll see, if I want to get back into it, they can.
Absolutely. It's never too late to, you know, to follow a dream. It's never too late and it's never too early. So yeah, absolutely. I hope so.
So, how did you get from there to writing the score for Secrets of Wales?
Mm. Well, again, it took a while. I mean, it took a while. No, it
Mhm.
things moved pretty quickly for me. I was very lucky. But I have met these agents based in the UK a while ago. It was very early on when I had started, and I was mostly doing short films and commercials, but they really believed in me very early on. And one of them, I've met Brian Armstrong, who's the film maker of the show, and it was a while ago. I think it was like a couple of years ago, and a year after that, they came back to them saying, we remember Raf, and we would love for her to pitch for a show that we're making right now about Wales. And I think that they had in mind at the beginning like multiple composers. They wanted to have, one composer per episode, for example. And I was meant to just write, the first episode. And I ended up doing the whole show because they were happy with my work. So I was really thrilled about that. So, and the agents who got me this gig are still my agents today. So that's a good lesson, that having people who believe in you very early on, yes, that's a good thing to have.
Absolutely. 1 second. My phone keeps going off, even though I thought I put it in airplane mode. So I'm going to make it shut up. Okay. Back to the important conversation. What got you guys to the point of you not just doing one episode? How did you end up doing all 4 episodes?
I don't really know why. I think it was, and how. I think it was very smooth. It's just happened, um, and yeah, I think it just happened. And to be honest, it's a little blurry. I can't really remember. It's just happened very quickly, um, and we started writing in March, like last year. So basically, it started when COVID started. So that was my COVID project because I wrote and I've written for the show for like 6 months after that, because we did one episode at a time, and there were some time in between two episodes every time. um and yeah, it was just went very smoothly, and it never felt like we had to discuss, like, the next step or what. It's just happened, like, okay, just do everything, and that's how it happened. But I think at the beginning I didn't really have a sense of how big this project would be at the end. I think nobody really did. We knew from the beginning that it was, executive produced by James Cameron, so we already knew that it was kind of a big, thing. But then, we knew that it would be on Disney Plus, that Sigourney Weaver was joining in, and it became this like big, show, and important show for Disney and National Geographic this year. So I feel really blessed to have been on board from the beginning and for everything. And I also feel like good about not necessarily knowing how big it would be at the beginning, because I think it
Mhm.
would have put like much more pressure on myself. And pressure's not always good, especially when you want like, the creative juice flowing. So so
Absolutely.
that
Some
was a good.
people some people do really well when they push themselves to the deadline and it's like all pressure all the time, but I need a little room to breathe and think.
Yeah, surprisingly, I don't think I have a problem with deadlines. Like, on the contrary, sometimes it just forces me to just, go straight to the point and,
Just
and do it and just do
mhm,
it. I think my issue is more with like, the scale of the project. Because
mhm.
I'm gonna start to, oh, but this is really big. A lot of people are gonna listen to that. And so I have to create something incredible, And I think that getting, starting with like the start point of saying I need to do something incredible, like the most beautiful music I've ever written, is not a good way to start a creative process. So yeah, but sometimes pressure is good, sometimes can be an obstacle, at least in my case.
I definitely get that. So, what was that process like at the very beginning of creating the sound palette and getting ready to score this series?
So, to be honest, I already had in mind some some creative ideas that I would put into this project, because as a composer, specifically as a French composer, it's hard not to think about this film in the 80s, The Big Blue, Le Grand Bleu in French. And it's a movie about it's a true story about a diver, a
Mhm.
passionate diver, who goes very deep in the ocean. And Eric Serra, the composer for the movie, has created those whale sounds. And it was hard for me not to be influenced by that, and not to think about his process, and I realized that it was not at all real whale sounds. He had recreated them with synthesizers. So I was very intrigued by that. So of course I thought about it before I even saw the images. I was like, I'm just gonna try and do something about the whale songs, because it's so special and it speaks to me so much. Um, so I guess that's how it started, really. But then I got the images and I started writing to the pictures right away. They had stopped filming right before I started working on the project. So thankfully I had the image very early on. And what I usually do for any project is that I will watch the images for the first time with my piano next to me, so I can just start. And if I have ideas, let them flow, and let them come in and record them. Because I have this thing about watching it, watching the images for the first time the same way the audience are going to see the pictures for the first time. And I just want to see how I'm going to react emotionally, and how these emotions are going to be conveyed by my music. So that's usually how I do it when I'm lucky enough to have the pictures early on. um and that's how it happened for Six of the Whales as well.
That's really cool. I feel like with documentaries, I've only scored them thus far as like assignments in class, but I feel like it's the hardest to navigate, at least for me, when it comes to figuring out how to approach it emotionally because you have narration pretty much all
Mhm.
the time and you don't want to be too much or too little at the same time. And the spectrum is even closer together when you have that full-time narration.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that even more specifically when it comes to wild, documentaries, and the fact that it has to be epic and majestuous, because that's what you see. It has to be. it has to be, wait, I'm just gonna turn off my phone too.
You're all good.
It has to be it 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 have to illustrate, what's going on the pictures, and so it has to be epic. Like all the images in this show are very either epic or very intimate. When we go from like these big landscapes or these big, whales crashing into the water and jumping out of the water and stuff like that, it has to be epic, but also it's a lot of music. It's not wall to wall, but it's a lot of music. There's a lot of music. So it doesn't really stop. So the music is very, very present. Um, and at the same time, it cannot be too present. It has to leave some room for the narration and for the sounds also, the natural sounds that are in the actual original uh, soundtrack, which is nature. So
Mhm.
there was a lot of challenges around that. You're completely right, and I think it's especially challenging in that kind of documentaries because it has to be epic, but it has to leave some room too. So you have to find the right balance, um, and and then there is like when you go, more into details. For example, there are a lot of um, language features that the whales are using, like all species. For example, beluga, they have this, tickling sound, those
Mhm.
clicks, and I had to be very careful. Although the music was very epic, I had to be careful about not using high pitched instruments, high pitched percussion. So, for example, the piano was not an option because it would conflict, with the natural sounds of the whales. So there were a lot of challenges, but at the same time, again, I was so free in the way I could approach, you know, the music angles and creative ideas, that it didn't really feel like it was a problem because
Mhm.
it was an obstacle, but at the same time, I had a lot of flexibility. So,
My favorite part where I feel like you really captured the nature of the scene well, especially with the sounds the whales are making, was in the second episode when the whales are making that bubble net and going the two moms are going in a spiral.
mhm.
That was probably my favorite cue out of the whole series that you did. The music there was felt like a ballet with
Mhm.
how they were doing that dance, but still had the epicness of they're on the hunt.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a good point you're making here, because that was there was a lot of I don't know how to express it. Sometimes my French is like, is like in the background, like, no, that's not as you say in English. But what I want to say is that sometimes the music could be very bipolar, in a sense that you have to be majestuous, but at the same time, there's a lot of intimacy, happening, or there's a lot of beauty, like those bubble nests, but at the same time, it's majestuous, it's epic. They're hunting, they're surviving, they're feeding their families. I mean, it's so there was a lot of stuff like that, and also, in the more playful scenes when you see those babies playing around, and it is playful, but at the same time they are practicing and they're learning how to hunt, and they could be eaten alive by like some other animal or even some other whale species like in a minute. So there's always these, like, ambivalence in the music that you have to respect, and that yeah, that was a big challenge, but it was also a lot of fun, to be honest.
Mhm. What cue was do you think was the most fun when you look back on the project? It just stands out as, "Oh, I loved doing this one."
Oh, you mean fun, like sounding fun, or fun to do, fun to make?
Fun to do.
Um, I think I have, I mean, I don't know. I have two actually that I really, really enjoyed doing. There was this one, I think it's in episode 3. I think it's in the sperm whale episode where you see these gigantic whales coming out the water in slow motion with this beautiful sunset or sunrise, I'm not sure to remember, and all those birds, and it's just out of this world, like what's happening there. It's just too beautiful to be real, to be honest. So I did this like huge theme that's actually recurrent throughout the show, and that's the explosion of this theme. It's never been that big ever anywhere else in the show, and there's a lot of room for the music at that point, and I loved it because it for me it was the moment to shine, was the music, because there was no narration. It was the slow motion. Everything on the pictures would say, bring it on with the music, it's all yours. And so I had to top the beauty of what was going on there, and I was like, my music is never going to be beautiful enough. It's just so beautiful what's going on. And yeah, so I think that's my favorite. And the other one, I don't think we can use the term fun, because what happens there is not fun at all. It's the mourning mother that is carrying her dead cow for days. This is one of my favorite cues, and I think in the soundtrack it's called "The Mourning Mother," and it is it is one scene that was very difficult and at the same time very interesting for me to score. Because first I had no idea that whales would do that. I had no idea that, orcas would do that. And then I read about it, and I've heard that sometimes for like a few weeks they do that. They don't let go. And I found it so deep. There's no, or maybe there is, but I'm not aware, but I don't think there is an equivalent in, the human being societies where we mourn for such a long time, like carrying a body like this. It was so powerful. And I had a few months old baby at home back then, so to me it was very powerful, and that's the one that really that sticks to my mind when I'm being asked this question.
Well,
But it was not
yeah.
fun. I mean, it's not fun, let's be honest. It's
Mhm.
not fun, but it was really really great to make.
I love that story, and your music definitely was beautiful enough on those cues.
Thank you.
When you were creating the music, was it all synthesizers? Was it all in the DAW, or did you get to work with live musicians on this project?
So it was never really an option to have live players. I think we could have at some point, but as I said, it really coincided with COVID when it started. So it was really at the beginning when nobody would really understand what was going on, and it was not even an option to even think about, gather some musicians, especially for something that's so heavily, orchestrated. To think about that option, to have like 60, 70 players in the same room at the same time. So I everything has been made in the box, as we say, produced and mixed in the box. The only real instruments that you're gonna hear are my voice and my piano. Um, and the rest was just, yeah, virtual instruments, and that was it was very but it was twofold, because in a way I had so much flexibility and freedom in the way I would use the instruments, and as you said, it's very hybrid. There's a lot of electronic elements to it, so it allowed me it left so much room, to add more electronic elements, to just do whatever I wanted with, instrumentations. If I wanted to add like 50 strings, you know the kind of freedom you would get when you write for trailers, because I did a lot of movie trailers, and the trailers, orchestras are the equivalent of, I don't know, three stadiums of, of musicians sometimes.
Mhm.
So the scale of it is really huge, and it kind of reminded me that this freedom that you have from an instrumentation point of view. And at the same time, it's a challenge, because you really want it to sound as authentic as possible, as much as possible, and sometimes it's not possible, so you have to work around it. And I would sometimes change the melody or change the instrumentation just to make sure that I find the right spot where it's okay. It sounds authentic, and that was specifically tricky when it came to solo instruments, because I liked to use solo strings for those intimate family moments, mother was her baby, or just a spiritual quiet moments. And yeah, it takes a lot of time and patience to get a result that will be okay to my ears. So yeah, no live players on that one. And um but yes, but indeed a lot of electronic elements, yeah.
Well, it sounds awesome. Your MIDI realization is fantastic. I was listening to it and I wasn't sure. I was like, is that a real violinist
I
or
think I think sometimes you can tell when for purists, I think it's audible sometimes, but in other cases it's true that I'm really glad about the result, because yeah, it was not easy. So I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Of course. All right, I have one more question for you today. What kind of whale do you most relate to?
Oh, that's a tough one. Um, I love them all, and I really want to be all of them at the same time. Um, I mean, I love the belugas because they look so fun. They have those little faces, you wanna those little clowns. I love them.
Yeah.
But I would say that I cannot say otherwise than like orcas, because of, again, this morning mother scene. Um, that's where I found myself to feel the closest to those animals. Just the sadness of the loss of a child, and also these this grandma at some point, orca, who's that is teaching the grandkids how to hunt, like the
Mhm.
grandmother playbook. And I found it really, really interesting to see how similar, uh, it takes, like, how similar to us they are. So I have to say the orcas. Yeah.
Awesome. I also said the belugas because I too like to go to large reunions of friends, even if I haven't even seen them in a year, so I can tell them all about my life.
That's exactly. That's what they do. They're so fun. I mean, they're all amazing. It's hard to pick one.
They also sound like me trying to tune my clarinet on a bad day.
Oh,
So,
that's true. Clarinet. I love clarinet. You know that this is to me, in my opinion, one instrument that we don't hear enough. I'm a big fan of clarinet. I think it's one of the most beautiful instruments on the planet, to be honest.
thank you. I
Mm.
agree.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have
Mhm.
a great rest of your day.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much. You too. Take care.
Thank you. Take
Nice to
care.
meet you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Nice to meet you. Bye. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for joining me today. I had a really awesome time talking to Raph about her work on this film and honestly just watching the series and learning about all of these whales. Documentaries are some of my guilty pleasures. I just love turning them on and then being able to go about my day while also just gaining all that information. What can I say? I'm kind of a nerd. And also, I love that she agrees with me. The clarinet is an instrument that we just don't hear enough. For more content like this and to hear more from awesome creators working in the music industry, please be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Facebook, or YouTube, wherever you're watching and listening. And I will see you guys later this week for another great interview. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.